Welcome to Talking Beats with Daniel Lalchuk. That's me, and I'm so glad you're here. If you like what we do, I'd love it if you gave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And if you're so compelled, write a review. That really helps, and maybe tell a friend or family member. They might like the show as much as you do. If you want to get involved in the program, visit our website, talkingbeats.com, and click Support the Show, where you can make either a one-time or a recurring donation. As we look to continue having cliché-free conversations of real substance with a diverse range of the world's most compelling people, your support is so appreciated, especially as we look to expand and increase our offerings. If you have a question, comment, or thought, find us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or if you wish to reach out directly, email me at daniel@talkingbeats.com. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get on with today's conversation. On today's program, food personality and cookbook author Jake Cohen. He's taken the food world by storm with his new book, Jewish Reinvented Recipes from a Modern Mensch, in which he writes in the introduction, Jewish food is constantly evolving. It's a cuisine largely composed of old country dishes that have traveled with the diaspora, marrying with the flavors of new places the Jews have settled, often as a result of fleeing persecution. New countries always came with new local culinary customs and the availability of new ingredients. The only constant was a desire to hold on to the food of our people in whatever regional variation that became, whether jalapeno-laced matzo ball soup in Mexico or maple-scented challah in Canada. All such dishes are still inherently Jewish and join the ever-expanding culinary lexicon of the tribe. End quote. A friend of mine and one of the most fun people to talk to. I'm thrilled to have Jake Cohen right here with me. Welcome to Talking Beats.
My pleasure. So excited to catch up and chat with you.
So here we are with the book, Jewish, also pronounced Jewish, but Jewish, I think is how you mean it to be said. Reinvented Recipes from a Modern Mensch. Okay, so let's talk about why Jewish food is having a resurgence. And before we get there, Jewish food is sort of a nebulous thing for a lot of people because it's so diverse. So what is it to you? I mean, where did this all come from?
I think when we talk about Jewish food having a resurgence, I think we're seeing a lot of like parallel moments just like this with almost every community and culture that is distinctly different from kind of the European standard of fine dining. When I think about like my time in culinary school and what we learned and working in Michelin star restaurants and all that stuff, it really focuses on French food, Italian food, and you see all of these cultures that have been deemed lesser. You think of Jewish food, and a lot of it is kind of stemming from communities that were on the poorer side and had to kind of make do and be resourceful. And now we're kind of reclaiming that pride in these dishes that we grew up with that kind of are paralleled with our definitions of comfort, of family, of community, of gathering. So for me, it was something that I didn't know I wanted to do until I started doing it. And it just kind of unlocked something where all of a sudden it was clearer and clearer every day that everything I do, my voice when it comes to cooking, my voice when it comes to writing, my just day-to-day life is all informed by being Jewish and that identity and that upbringing, even in a secular way.
So Jewish food is sort of fascinating because, as people probably know, there are Jews all over the world. There are Jews in Yemen, there are Jews in Italy, there are Jews in China, there are Jews in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. So all over, here we basically have a community of people spread all over the world who adapt what the food is where they are to the Jewish culinary laws. And that's how Jewish food is born in different parts of the world. And so what you do in this book is basically take the Jewish food that you refer to sort of the comfort, but there's also forays into other countries that we wouldn't so much think of immediately. Iraq used to have an amazingly vibrant Jewish population. So Talk about a bit how you balance out, the sort of Jewish brisket that people would think is sort of traditional for American Jews, and then suddenly an Iraqi chicken dish. I mean, where do these tentacles go?
Yeah. That's the beautiful thing about Jewish food. It's food cooked by Jews for Jewish ritual, and that looks different across the world and across the diaspora. And for me, I think I grew up in this New York bubble where most of the community is Ashkenazi. And in America, the generalized, I would say, understanding of Jewish food is rooted in Ashkenazi classics like bagels and lox and brisket and matzo ball soup and latkes. But when I met my husband, Alex, he's Persian Iraqi Jewish. And it was actually quite fascinating because he grew up in Florida and not in a large Jewish community. So when we started dating, he actually had no knowledge of a lot of the Ashkenazi foods that I would consider quite commonplace. Like he never heard of babka before. And for most Americans, like you just need to have a kind of a rudimentary understanding of Seinfeld to know you can't beat a babka. But for
A
him,
chocolate
it
babka, by
became
the way.
a chocolate babka, not the lesser cinnamon, though I have some conflicting thoughts on that because there time and a place for a cinnamon babka.
To quote Jerry
But
Seinfeld, lesser babka, I think not.
exactly. He opened my eyes to then the other side of that. So I was so busy trying to expose him to all this Ashkenazi food, and his response was, "Well, here's all the food that I grew up with tied to Jewish ritual." And that looked nothing like my menu. And it became this really, really incredible blending of cultures and families and recipes that made me understand that this definition of Jewish food is so much broader than what we kind of learn in Hebrew school or learn in our family. And once I got a taste of that, I just had to keep going because I just think it's something so incredibly beautiful and powerful to find this connection to dishes and cuisines and ingredients across the world that we have some connection to because they're used for the same Jewish rituals. It's myself and you and the Jewish communities in India, China, North Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and they're all celebrating the same ritual, but with a completely different menu. And the way that we have seen Jewish food evolve because of that, I think it's the most fascinating thing.
One of the most interesting aspects out of all of this is the idea that you can be very unreligious, but also super connected to Jewish culture, super connected to Jewish music and food and literature. So here you are, not a particularly religious person, as far as I know, as far as you write in the book, and neither am I, but I wonder how the exploration and the cooking and the development of all the Jewish food and the searching for the roots and the diversity in Jewish food has made you feel closer to Judaism in a way without possibly becoming an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah. I think it comes down to a really interesting conversation that I have explored, which is this idea of what makes Jewish people Jewish. And I'm not talking about in the sense of self-identity. I talk about a lot of the stereotypes, the caricatures that you see on like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, the neuroses you see on Seinfeld, these depictions of Jews that I know and love, and I have learned to accept that I have also inherited. And I think of it all the time because I love to compare myself and my family to very much like The Nanny. I just think that Fran Drescher and her relationship with Renee Taylor in that show is so iconic and relatable. And something that I've really loved exploring is how that's actually tied to Torah. And I'm not religious, but I do think that one of the things that's really remarkable is the way that over generations and throughout the traveling from Eastern Europe and from even throughout America, we've seen the secularization of the Jewish community. But at its core, so many of the values that were instilled in us from Jewish learning and Jewish teaching, which at its core are mainly just ethical dilemmas and moral understandings, remain intact. And it's something as simple as the way that we feel very passionate about bringing a host gift or never showing up empty-handed, and our views on charity and community and welcoming the stranger, all of these things that are just so commonplace in a non-religious person's headspace can be tied to religion, which is it sounds counter intuitive, but at the end of the day, the more I've kind of try to learn about Judaism and Jewish teachings, not in a way of becoming more religious, but in a way of understanding myself deeper, my family deeper. It's kind of ignited just increased passion, because eventually you realize it's like you can fight it, but there's no point. This is who we are. And these core values, like the foundation of Judaism, it's hospitality. If you love food, if you love cooking for others, if you love doing good deeds, like then great, you're going to find some really incredible guidance through Judaism. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of things I leave behind, including, being kosher or turning off or on lights on Shabbat or any of that stuff. But that's the beauty of not claiming to be Yentl, but just someone who's really passionate about identity and culture and making it my own.
This spring has been interesting. You brought up a lot there, but I just want to mention one thing, because I was going to go there later, but here we are, and not wedded to a script or anything. So this spring and summer, we've seen an amazing rise in anti-Semitic attacks, even in New York City, the last place in the world that you'd think that would be happening. And
Yeah.
and it's widely known, I think now, although maybe not widely known, enough that it's been quite underreported by media outlets, including the paper of that very city, the New York Times. Here you are making Jewish food and sort of unabashedly waving the flag of the best of Jewish culture. What do you think it's been like this spring and summer to see a hugely alarming rise of violent anti-Semitic attacks, and Jews are the number one subject of religious hate attacks in the United States by a large margin in any case? What has been the experience this spring and summer publicly cooking Jewish food, being on social media, coming on shows like this, talking to people about Jewish food? What kind of emotional complications have been added to the process?
Yeah, emotional complications, a great way to put it. It's a tough time. I think it's hard because we are both mourning a lot of hate while at the same time kind of coming to this reckoning of the society that we live in, and understanding that a lot of people don't care about Jews. And there's that book that recently came out, Jews Don't Count, by David Badiel, that kind of touches upon that. And it's actually, I just ordered it the other day, so I'm waiting for that to arrive. But it's this idea that, like, you think of so many of these reckonings of hate against specific marginalized communities, and when it comes to Jews, you start to look back, and I talk with my friends, and I talk with people in the industry, and you start to see these microaggressions that are so commonplace and have never been taken seriously. And that's just on the small scale, let alone when you see all of these things that are happening on a much larger scale that really go down to, like, absolutely horrifying and terrifying. And you consider, like, all right, do I wear my Star of David out? Do I wear a kippah? And I do not wear a kippah, but I do wear a Star of David proudly every day. And I do not take it off, because I do think that part of what is happening right now is terrible. But I think it's also as important as ever to show pride in Judaism and pride in my identity. I think too often we've seen so many instances throughout history of Jews hiding themselves out of fear. And I think that's completely a valid response to what's going on. But for me, I just think that I'm part of a generation that's really looking to change that narrative of Jews not powerless, Jews not in fear, Jews not in hiding of identity.
Did you ever think you'd see a time when New York City would be an epicenter of anti-Jewish attacks?
When you think about the stuff that has happened just one generation away, let alone two generations away, it's not so surprising. It's as simple as like my grandmother was a hidden child during the Holocaust. My mother-in-law had to flee Iran with her family, leaving everything behind. Like these are so close. These are people who are still alive. These are people who you still see the inherited trauma passed on. Um, so I think we also grow up in these households that remind us that things are good for now, but count your blessings because you never know, because history has repeated itself generation after generation after generation, especially when it comes to anti-Semitism. So while I am hopeful that we are in a place of wide range kind of prioritization for equality and human rights, it's something that's also very, very concerning, but not to a degree that I'm ever going to stop being proud of being Jewish. And I think, if anything, it's made me want to double down on doing it in the public eye.
As you know, on this show, we do a lot of politics, and we had on Chris Matthews recently, who's just an icon of all things political over the past 30 or 40 years, and a lover and a student of history. And he said that he was very concerned, beyond concerned, and he said that past is prologue. And he said, I don't know what this is a prologue to, but it's menacing and it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jake Cohen, you mentioned a few dishes before. The sort of, I'm chuckling now because they're the dishes that people would think about if you went down the street and just took a random poll. What's Jewish food? Okay, brisket, matzo balls, bagel and lox. You do cover all of that in this book, in addition to many other things. But let's talk about brisket for a moment, because now there's a whole cadre of people down south who think of brisket as a barbecue food, non-Jews who, in East Texas on the side of a 2-lane road, are doing brisket. But okay, that's that too, which is very good. You have two kinds of brisket in this book. Talk about a bit of the history of brisket in Jewish cooking, and then these two briskets that you have, and sell us on it. Why tonight should we go make brisket?
So it's funny because even you mentioned Southern like smoked brisket, and I was listening to one talk, and there's actually a big correlation between Jewish immigration to the South and the popularization of that cut of meat, and then its popularity in Southern barbecue, because everything is connected. People just see like today's world's like, oh, it is what it is because that's how it is. But really, it's like there are all of these really fascinating food ways that have only developed, honestly, in the past 100 years, 200 years, because of the fact that like that's when you really started to see these mass kind of community movements. But when you think of brisket, it's also rooted in poverty. It's this cheap cut of meat that's so tough. So tough. But when you cook it low and slow, it becomes juicy and tender and absolutely incredible. The thing that I love the most about my book and my perspective and this kind of new age of people cooking and having pride in whatever culture they come from is this kind of fighting against this word authenticity. When you think about food media, cookbooks in the past 50 years, everything was so simplified to like one version. Like, what is an authentic Jewish brisket? An authentic Jewish brisket can only be authentic as far as one family. And this essay I write on brisket in the book is really talking about the fact that when I started dating Alex and we did our first year of combined Seders, he came to my family for one night, and the second night we did with his sister-in-law. And his brother also married into an Ashkenazi family. And the thing that was so fascinating is that the way we made brisket was completely different. And it became this really, 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 really intriguing discussion for me as I started to explore more Ashkenazi families and what they used to make their brisket. And you see Jewish families that ended up in the Midwest or in the South, and sometimes they're adding ketchup or molasses to their brisket recipe. My family uses a very tomato-heavy brisket. My sister-in-law's family does not use any tomato. And you really see that this is something that is so diverse because even though its origins might have been the same, the way it's evolved has branched out depending on everyone's journey. And while a lot of these journeys are rooted in trauma, in fleeing persecution, in war and strife, we're now in this age where Jewish food and a lot of food can just evolve based on joy, based on exposure to different cuisines and ingredients and flavors. So in this book, I have a kind of an updated version of my aunt's recipe for a roasted tomato brisket. And then as an ode to my sister-in-law, Lee, I did a French onion brisket, which funny enough, my sister now prefers to the tomato one. And yeah.
And indeed, you write, if I can just read a little about what you write in the brisket chapter, quoting here, however, it was not the Fisher family brisket, and I was stripped of brisket duty the following year, so their version could return. Their brisket is braised with peppers, mirepoix, and red wine, then covered in a sauce made by pureeing all the vegetables with the braising liquid. It was delicious, but nothing like what I knew of brisket. I had never had brisket without tomatoes. Fast forward a little bit, going to what you do. So instead of tomato sauce, I roast canned whole peel tomatoes until caramelized, then mash them up to join caramelized onions and mushrooms, a healthy glug of red wine, and plenty of aromatics. So how long does it take to develop a recipe like this? Because it's not a super complex recipe. And if you look at the list of ingredients, okay, there's about 8 ingredients here. But you really want to get it right because it can always be sort of like a piece of music. You can always improve. You think you did it great.
Exactly.
But you think, oh, maybe tomorrow night when I go on stage, I can get that Beethoven just 1.2% better, or 0.2% better. But cookbook, you got to get it down in print. So this is the very best you could do at that time. Can you do anything better now?
I think that's the conversation is like, what is better? It's not better, but it's different. Each recipe in this book meant that I got it to a place in which I was so happy with it and confident that anyone making that would have success and find joy in sharing that with their family. That being said, one of my favorite parts about this process is seeing how people have taken my recipes and then ran with it. So let's say someone doesn't like something. I love the addition of mushrooms for a really earthy quality. If people really, really, really love that, sometimes I tell people like add dried mushrooms and like simmer that with roast that with your tomatoes, and or like play around with different alliums. You're making a French onion brisket, but you're doing it in Passover. It's spring. Throw in a bunch of leeks. Like really, I think the beauty is what you can do to make it your own and make it fit in that moment. Because in the same way that I'm never in the mood for the same thing every day, every holiday, I want to switch it up a little. And sometimes it's going to be better for some people, and sometimes they're going to be like, no, we like the other one better. And that's just life. You're never going to please everyone, but you want to please the most amount of people as possible. More and most importantly, you got to please yourself.
Okay, step back for a moment. This isn't a Jewish-focused show, so we have people listening who are Jews and non-Jews. So what are matzo balls, and why are they so good?
It's funny because I think that it's my all-time favorite food. Definitely my definition of comfort food are matzo balls. That's for sure. But what I really found was that it is probably predominantly just known in metropolitan areas like New York and LA, wherever you can find a Jewish deli, because it's just, everyone loves it. It's a mashup of ground matzah with eggs, some type of fat, traditionally schmaltz. That's what I use in my recipe. Some salt and a little bit of herbs, if you want. I add herbs. Some people don't. And you scoop them and then you poach them, and they become these fluffy, tender dumplings to float in chicken soup. And I think it is the most incredible thing ever. It's a perfect extension of love. It's everything that my mom would make us when we were sick. Literally, I mean, this is not like, I mean, I guess it is like to like name drop, but like like just a few weeks ago, I feel like everyone's now coming out of COVID, and they're getting the first colds again since we're reintegrating in terms of seeing people. And I've become friendly with Katie Couric, and she had a cold, so I made her matzo ball soup and dropped it off in her apartment. And to me, it was just like, I don't think twice about that. When I know someone I love is sick, the first thing I do is I make the matzo ball soup.
Did it work on her?
Yeah, she loved it.
It worked.
I mean, naturally.
Yeah. Okay, so we have this. Basically, every culture, as we've alluded to, has some kind of dumpling and some kind of dumpling that floats in broth. And this is the Jewish version of it. It should be very light, right? It's what should they dissolve? Should they melt?
Wow,
should they have some
wow.
bite? Okay, go.
So here's the deal. This is the same conversation as the brisket. Everyone has their definition of what's great matzo ball based on their family. Some people make them really small and dense. Some people make them very large and fluffy. And it's a conversation of like sinkers versus floaters is the descriptors that people use. Like, oh, does your grandma make them sinkers or floaters? Do they make them dense or light? And to each their own. Some people like them really, like you look at a deli's going to be huge, like it's these massive balls, like comically large. And then some people's family don't do such a great job. And they become dense, but they become the matzo balls that you grow up with and know and love. So who am I to say? I'm somewhere in the middle, and I think my recipe is pretty perfect. So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I'm not gonna fight you on that.
You're not going to fight me on that. Okay, no problem. I'll escape from that unscathed. Okay. So when we have conversations on this podcast, as you know, we always talk about music because music, well, I guess along with food, but music is one of the, say, two great unifying forces in the world. Food can be the other one. And everybody has music in their lives. Music plays a big role in my life, as you know, and I think most people are passionate about music. Do you listen to music while you cook, while you test recipes? I mean, music is sort of what we all need in these volatile times. Music is that force we can all lean back on and say, wow, there's a force of solidity that's going to be with us when times get tough.
Yes. Oh, I mean, music's always playing in the kitchen. I think it's I listen to when I'm developing recipes, when I'm cooking for parties, or even when I'm like writing, like when I wrote my book, I have different playlists for every moment, which is funny because I do think that there are these Spotify playlists specifically for like listen while you write, which I really enjoy because those are mainly like your kind of classical pieces, which I think is great because I just can't have like words or lyrics, but I'm a very, very big top 40 person. I love pop music. I have a fascination with pop culture in general. So just the idea of pop music and what makes a pop star separate from the music itself, but from the persona and the presence and everything has always been like one of my like most fascinating things that I would love to explore. And as a result, I just adore a good pop song.
What's on your playlist right now? Name a few songs. Educate us in the pop world.
Yes. Okay, so I will say she hasn't come out with a bop in a hot second, but Kim Petras, I think, is one of the most incredible pop stars of the moment. I think we're still really enjoying Gaga's last album, Chromatica. And the thing that I think really got me, and we're seeing a big trend in this way, is Kylie Minogue's latest album, which is really kind of on this forefront of this resurgence of disco in pop music, which I love because I mean everyone loves disco. I mean not everyone, but at least the gay community loves disco. Like you think of and again, I always tie this to pop culture because I do think that with top 40 pop music, that has to be part of this conversation of zeitgeist and the role it plays as music as a soundtrack. And when you look at TikTok, which is such a huge platform for sharing content and storytelling, the thing that I've noticed the most in terms of remixes is people using ABBA songs. I would say ABBA is probably the most played artist in some way or another on TikTok subliminally. When
That's
like the new
fascinating.
Doja Cat song or Megan Thee Stallion and they're doing the dance to that, that's fine. But some of the biggest trends are like are just these like remixes or these small snippets of background or instrumental from an ABBA song, and the way that it just like it always hits because these melodies, the feeling that it gives you, it's just so powerful. And I think we're really, that is helping push this narrative of the resurgence of disco in pop music right now.
A couple of years ago, we did with the orchestra an ABBA concert, and it was great because the songs lend themselves super well to these big, soaring melodies with the horns and the full string section.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. I don't think there was a dry eye in the house. I mean, that was just unbelievable mixture of the classic symphony with the joy and the positivity and the optimism of ABBA.
Yeah. I mean, I'm obsessed. I've always been obsessed. I just think that, and you think of like the romanticization of like Mamma Mia and what that did, and it's still there. I feel like it's still just as popular today.
Let's talk pantry for a moment, because let's say someone hears this podcast and they go out and they order the book, Jewish, and they say, okay, I want to get into making some Jewish food. I'm not Jewish. I don't even know really what I'm doing, but I like being in the kitchen. So in the opening of the book, you have a sort of things I buy section. So, okay, we all know what egg noodles are, sour cream. We get pickles. We understand. I look across the page. There's some ingredients that people might not be familiar with. Urfa biber. These are sun-dried Turkish peppers that you say add a deep smokiness. Okay, so what else should we have around the pantry? There's some famous spice. Turmeric is fairly common. Sumac, fairly common. We all have flour and salt. How do you assemble this list, and how should we expand our palate without being too intimidating?
Yeah. So here's the thing. I am writing a Jewish cookbook. I want it to be representing the Jewish community as best as I can. And we were just discussing earlier this idea, this concept around the Ashkenormativity, is the way that it's put, in the States.
Meaning Jews who came from primarily Eastern
Europe.
European,
Yes.
the colder countries. Just think cold Eastern Europe where there's a lot of potatoes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Lots of potatoes. So what has happened is this idea that is Jewish food. That is the Jewish pantry. But really, I wanted to expand people's minds, palates, and pantries to Jewish communities around the world. So for me, what that looks like is a combination of like, what are the things that my husband's family always has, and then like things like sumac or saffron are really like always stocked. There is never a moment in which there's not a giant jar of sumac in the cupboard, or a jar of amba, or lots of ground cardamom, and these are all things that need to be called out. So for something like urfa biber, which is a smoked chili pepper from Turkey, that's something that it deserves a place. And if you really want to be representing the Jewish community well, you got to like do a little work. That means going to the store and getting preserved lemons. Like, great. Like, everyone has them now. You can get them online. You get anything online delivered in 2 days in this country. It's a blessing. But with that comes a responsibility that if you want to be really expanding your palate and your understanding of this community and this culture and these recipes, then you might have to do some work. I'm not asking you to venture on a crazy journey across the world and smuggle it back in your suitcase. I'm asking you to go online, Google it for 15 seconds and have it delivered to your door. Like, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad, and the taste is absolutely wonderful. One of my favorites. I was introduced to za'atar. People who listen to this show know that I went to kindergarten in Jerusalem, and so za'atar was very, very common then. And my mom always used to just slice up a wonderful baguette, brush it with olive oil, top of za'atar, and put it in the oven very briefly. And it was just an incredible flavor. She hasn't done that in a while. I should ask her. And that's great. Za'atar is some combination of oregano, thyme, marjoram, and what is this last one? Bible hyssop.
Bible hyssop, sumac, and sesame. So really, za'atar is both the name of a spice blend and the name of an herb. That there's no real translation, but the closest one is Bible hyssop, which is a wild herb that grows in the Levant. And they call it Bible hyssop because it's an herb that's often mentioned in the Bible. And it is one of the most fragrant, important flavorings and spice blends for cultures around the Levant. And it's not something that belongs to anyone. You'll find it in Lebanese cooking and Palestinian cooking and Israeli cooking and Jordanian cooking. Really all over the Levant, you're going to find this blend. And I think that's the beauty is a lot of these ingredients, techniques, dishes, they really span much further back than current drawn borders. You think of something that I'm currently exploring and trying to learn is this dish called zulbia, which Iranian Jews would often make for Hanukkah. It's these fried fritters, like little funnel cakes that are then soaked in a saffron syrup. And you'll see something almost identical in India called jalebi, which I might be pronouncing wrong, which is funny because obviously to tie it back to music, there is this crossover between this Indian singer and Jason Derulo, who just came out with a song called Jalebi Habibi, or Jalebi Baby. And it's because of the fact that the Persian Empire spanned this entire area. So now you have two distinctly different dishes from two distinctly different countries, but the actual origins of where it comes from is unknown. And where do we go from there? People love a simple answer. This comes from here. They don't love complexity. But for so many dishes, so many cultures, so many food stories, it is so complex. And I love that.
Well, I love that too, and I love this conversation. I also love how food can both educate people and bring people together, and the same way with music, that all you need is an open mind. You don't need expertise, you don't need an education, you don't need a special diploma or background. All you need is an open mind, and when people say to me, well, I don't know Mozart, so I don't know if I'm going to like it. All you need to do is sit down with open ears, in the same way if I don't know what Urfa Bieber is, why be skeptical? Sit down. I might love it. If I hate it, I just don't need to eat it again. It's that simple. If you hate Mozart, you don't need to listen to it again, but I bet you'll love it.
Of course. That's the magic of this. It's people just need to exposure is half the battle.
At least half the battle, I would say. Jake Cohen, so look, zoom out. Here we are, summer 2021, and the world is a chaotic place, to say the least. Things are swirling around. There's a bombardment of news all the time. It's so nice when we get to do something like this in this program that isn't related to the news directly. So are you optimistic about how food, your role specifically in the food world, can make some good? Of course, people are going to like the book. They're going to like your recipes. If they go to your house for dinner, they'll like your cooking. That's all great, but what's the bigger picture here? Be an optimist. What is the bigger picture that you can do, that great cooking and sharing of experiences can do for all of us?
Humanizing us, creating moments that allow people to see similarities, make parallels. I think really at its core, this passion for expanding on and exploring Jewish culture is, on one end, preservation, because you have a generation of Jews and this last generation that's connected to kind of our roots, and wherever those roots are getting older. and these stories, these recipes need to be preserved. Maybe not for you, but for next generation, 2 generations, when all of a sudden they wanted to explore their history and their lineage. And this current generation has kind of put a roadblock because they never knew, or they never bothered to ask, or they never bothered to write down the recipe. All of these things. It's so selfish because it's preventing all future members of your family from having this connection. So for me, it's about continuing this tradition, inspiring others to continue this tradition. And from there, I mean, it's making us a little bit more normalized and popular in the world, which is the goal.
The goal indeed, and I've made it my goal to get a little better acquainted with kitchen practices. I'll use this book as a guide. I'll go order some ingredients that I might not have yet, and I'll report.
I'll tell you right now,
Yeah.
a quick thing, because I got a message this morning from someone being like, "Hi, I'm in the Hamptons, and I need to tell you a funny story. There have been a few fine food stores that I've been going to that carry preserved lemons for this one recipe in my book. And they said that it's been selling out because of so many people wanting to make this recipe. And they just had never been carrying that many preserved lemons, but the demand is increasing now.
What's the recipe?
Keeps selling out.
What's the recipe?
It's this sheet pan chicken legs with kale, crispy chickpeas, and preserved lemon. So easy, so delicious, and it's an example of changing the narrative. This was an ingredient that was not popular, not that it wasn't popular. People weren't aware of it, and now that they are, and now that they're buying it, now that they enjoy it, now that they want to keep this in their pantry, we're seeing this transition, and that's the magic of this.
Okay, wait. But before we go, can you tell us quickly how to make it?
I mean, it's so easy to make. All it is lemon, salt, and thyme. The thing is it takes at least a month, if not. I mean, ideally, when I make preserved lemons, about 3 months. All you do is you make a slit in a whole lemon, like you make a little X halfway through, and you stuff it with kosher salt, and you throw it in a jar, and you put it out on the counter for a few months.
Okay, but how do we make, let's say we have a jar of preserved lemons here. We've ordered it from a food store. We've gone to the Hamptons and bought it. However, we've acquired it. We have the preserved lemons. We have chickpeas. We have kale. We have chicken. How do we make the dish? We want to make it now.
It's so easy. All you do is you chop up the whole lemon. The beautiful thing about preserving lemons is you get to eat the rind. You can eat the whole thing, even the seeds. I don't even take out the seeds. And you chop it up and you throw it in with some chicken legs, some olive oil, some whole can of chickpeas, and without drained, of course. And I use some Aleppo pepper, which is a spiced pepper from Syria, though you could also use crushed red pepper. You let it marinate, and then you throw it on a sheet pan, bake it at a really high temperature, and then when it's almost done, you throw some kale around it, and then you got a one-pan dinner. One-pan dinner.
Okay, so about, 5-7 minutes for the kale?
Yeah. And for the chicken, it's like it's not crazy either. It's like probably 25 minutes.
Well, who could complain? That sounds pretty good to me. I'm going to go get preserved lemons right now. I think everybody else is too. Jake Cohen, leaving on a high, bright note, high citrusy bright note. I thank you very much. I hope there's another time, and keep cranking out those recipes. They're great.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Talking Beats with Daniel Elchuk. The original theme music is by Ronald Barkham. The content coordinator is Nathaniel Mosey, and Doug Christian is executive producer. We invite you to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. You can support us at patreon.com/talkingbeats. That's patreon.com/talkingbeats. And be sure to check us out on social media. We'll see you next time on Talking Beats with Daniel Elchuk.